On the 19th of June in 1864, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, with shaky hands, would grab a couple pieces of paper and he would write down the words that he was sure would be the last words he would ever say to his wife. But what he couldn't know was that not only would he survive the wound that happened to him just the day prior, but that he was going to be spot commissioned to brigadier general and spend the next 50 years of his life in excruciating pain with a fistula that developed as a result of this wound, causing him so many moments of pain and agony in his life. Eventually, he would become one of the last Civil War soldiers to die as a result of a wound in combat. Today, we're here at Petersburg to tell you that story. I'm out here at the site of the Battle of the Crater right now in Petersburg, Virginia. And we're making our way over to a location that right now you can only visit that spot if you park at a busy intersection and kind of dodge traffic, really. A sign had been placed a long time ago, supposedly marking the location where Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain had received his spot promotion or had been wounded. Well, the spot was actually discovered by Mr. Rosebach, I believe is his name, and as a result, the sign was moved to that location. The location happens to be in front of a Nakano Lodge. It is a busy intersection right before you get to the interstate, and there's a little gravel there where you can pull off and take a picture of the sign if you want to. We're going to walk through Petersburg National Military Park over to where that sign is, and we're going to read the sign, talk about the history as we're coming back through those woods, and kind of rediscover really what this man went through in his life as a result of this wound. This was not your typical situation in the American Civil War, and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was already famous for what he did in Gettysburg at Little Round Top. So this is a pretty big story, and I think it's something that really needed to be covered, which is why we're out here telling the story today. Now, General Meade would cross over the James River using pontoon boats and a 2,200-foot bridge. Also, Ben Butler and his men would be the lead element of this attack going into Petersburg, and his men would cross over and start that attack on the 15th of June. The attack was barely managed by Ben Butler, and it was not as successful as it could have been. Along with the other elements that attacked, which leads us to the point here on the 18th of June, where the primary attack happens, and we're looking at a situation where not only is Chamberlain thrusted into this, but waves and waves of Union soldiers are thrusted into this when they could have taken Petersburg by storm just a few days earlier with barely anybody there in support. But now, you fast forward to when Chamberlain's in the fight, and roughly 20,000 Confederate soldiers are now out here in support, protecting Petersburg from being taken. Now, the park itself, the tour road is closed, so there's really not too many ways to get in here other than on foot to see this place. And right now, I'm walking over to where the Battle of the Crater took place. Well, really, I'm in the middle of it right now. And continuing along to tell this story. Now, PGT Beauregard was driven from his first line of defense because of that attack, and he ends up back at a place called Harrison's Creek as a result. After that, the 18th Corps was relieved by the 2nd Corps, and then on the 16th, the 2nd captured more of the lines. So as you can see, the Union soldiers are doing quick work. They are actually pushing the Confederates out of their lines and causing them to react to the situation that's in front of them. But what they could not see is the fact that the Confederate soldiers were being quickly reinforced, and that here pretty soon they were going to have a real fight on their hands in a very well entrenched enemy on their own ground. Now, one thing I noticed as I walked up out here to the location where the crater is, normally I'm out here on a bright sunny day trying to imagine what this fight is like, but here I am at the end of the winter, and I'm looking across this field directly across to the Taylor house in front of me there, and then the crater right here in the rear of my shot. You can see right behind me there. The crater actually looks like a crater today. The shadows, the overcast, kind of help give it that bowl, if you will. And then way off in the distance here, you get nothing but a clear, clean view all the way across to the Taylor house ruins that are on the other side there. Now, Rosebach used the landmarks that are out here to identify where he believed Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was actually injured and nearly killed. He used the fact that Chamberlain himself had described a railroad cut. He'd also described a swampy area. And then he described an ice house. Well, at the previously known location, there was no ice house to be found. There were no farmhouses around or anything that would indicate that there would have been an ice house there. But here, at the Taylor house, there's an ice house. Also, Pegram Salient. This is the main line that they believe that they were coming across to attack Pegram Salient, not the ravine itself. So, out at this location, everything lines up to where Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain should have probably been out here fighting. Now, during that fight, on the 17th, the 9th Corps gained even more ground, and then Beauregard, as a result, would end up stripping his Howlett lines to draw his troops back to protect Petersburg. Well, then Robert E. Lee decides he's going to send in reinforcements after a couple of days of what's going on over here, realizing he got caught with his pants down. They're protecting Richmond, and Richmond's not the goal. That sets us up for the 18th. The 2nd, the 11th, and the 5th Corps are coming across this field, and they're headed right in this direction towards Taylor House and that salient we were talking about earlier. Part of that group, though, were a bunch of Pennsylvanians, and in charge of the Pennsylvanians was the man from Maine, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. At this point in the war, he was now in charge of men from the Keystone State. As it gets over here and they start to attack, their men are basically repulsed time and time again and beaten and bloodied. There's a lot of casualties that happen as a result of this attack, and it becomes very clear that they're not just going to mash their way through these lines. Well, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's out here, and he gets to that high point over there where that crossroads is, somewhere in that area, and that is when it happens. There are some accounts that said that a bullet ricocheted off of a rock and comes up and hits him in his hip and runs through his body. And the medical reporting would suggest that the bullet actually traveled from hip to hip, landing just underneath the surface of the skin on the other side, and breaking bones and stuff through his pelvis, and as it traveled, it would clip his bladder, causing urine to end up inside his body. And this is where sepsis sets in. He gets a lot of infection as a result of this. I'm about to walk off over into the wooded section here that I can see clearly through the woods here, thanks to it being wintertime, although it's 80 degrees out here. I'm gonna see if I can't make my way across there and take a look at the terrain that we're crossing as we get through these woods before we get to that sign on the other side. Now for some battlefield orientation out here. This is the main parking lot for the actual crater itself. There's the crater battlefield. Just up on the other side of the hill there is where the Union soldiers are actually coming in from during that Battle of the Crater. Well, what we're identifying is off in these woods down here, there's actually a boggy marsh or swamp-like area. And I'm going to pan by here in just a second, and you're going to be able to see the low-lying wetland down there that we're talking about, that is the marsh or the swamp itself. And you can see it down there, just coming around the corner. The nice yellow flowers are out today. So here it is. So here's this low-lying wet area, and the further you travel out in this direction, the wetter it gets down there. And it is a swamp. There's all kinds of snakes and good stuff out there for you to step on. Well, off through these woods here, on that hill, just on the other side, is the Econo Lodge. During the summertime, there's lots of leaves out here, and you can't see that, and it kind of blocks the sound of the interstate and everything running by. But this is the direction in which they're coming from, and stretching out in that direction, coming across this field here. So we're going to see if we can't make our way up on that hill to see if we can see the sign that was posted on the road about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, because I don't recall seeing anything inside this park here talking about that particular moment. I have a quote from a Union soldier that came across this field and saw some of the things that happened out here during that fight. Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Lyman. As he was approaching the area and looking at a location where some of the artillerists were, he made the statement that, "I shall never forget one poor artilleryman, his face almost blown to pieces, one of his eyes hanging out, and his clothes on fire, apparently from a premature shell explosion." That is a pretty vivid picture of the fight that happened out here as a result of those lines coming forward and fighting back and forth. And he saw a lot more than that. He actually witnessed one of the officers in his unit being struck by a bullet and eventually taking his last breath. There's many things that the man saw, and he reported on Chamberlain briefly on what happened with Chamberlain out here as well. So this fight was a vicious fight coming across this field, and it's a wonder if anybody really survived it. The ones that didn't have a lot of nice things to say about it. So I'm making my way out here into the wooded area that I was talking about earlier, going towards that hotel and cross section of roads. This field doesn't have a very clear path, but when you go to the cross section of road here, you can actually look down into where the park is, and you can see where I'm standing at right now. Now I'm at a high point, and the further you go out into these fields, the more and more you start to see the resemblance of earthworks. So there's earthworks right off in the front area here, facing where the hotel is. And then this is kind of a drop off from here. You can see as it runs all the way down in this direction. Nice pointed area. The embankment drops off right here. And then, crossing down over these earthworks, you'll be able to see the sign just on the other side there. Now when you're out there in that wooded area, you can actually safely get to the sign and see it from that location. And we should be able to pull off the road over there and see the sign for Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the struggle that he had here at this field. But this wooded area, preserved as it is is where a lot of that fighting took place, coming across this field and heading towards the Taylor House, which is just off in that distance there. And you can see there's the parking lot where the crater is. Some pretty neat stuff out here. It's amazing that they don't have a trail leading towards that area. There is a couple of cleared paths, though. It looks like people have been constantly walking back and forth out here. Whether or not they're out here enjoying the view, I'm not sure, but we're going to take a look. So now from this vantage point, you're able to see clearly this depression. It comes up, it's a plain, it's a big hill, and then it drops off over there. And then you can see the earthworks scattered all throughout this area, leading towards the hotel there. It almost looks like a road cut of some sort here too. I'm not familiar with this area, so I couldn't tell you, but this is either, it looks like it could be a cut of some sort for a road or a railroad, or it could just be an old road bed that used to run through here, and what looks like earthworks on either side. So I'll have to take a look at the maps and see if I can get more information. But if you look straight out through the woods there, there's a shiny whitish spot over there. That's the road that is parked right beside where the sign is. And we're going to drive over there in just a second because I don't want to go down in this bank here and end up injuring something that I shouldn't be injuring, like possible earthworks or what have you. And I'm going to make my way over that sign and talk about the fight from that vantage point over there. So, back out of the woods we go. Now, Dennis Rosbach is the one that authored that book that I'm talking about. And he's the one that located or identified this location back here as a place where Chamberlain most likely was wounded. It's pretty neat that he was able to pay attention to the details like that and then check out the surrounding area and identify the location. But can you imagine being those soldiers out here fighting, trying to press the enemy and possibly win this entire war, because that's what they were thinking, and then Chamberlain gets hit? Well, his thinking was, if my men see me hit and they see me fall, then it's going to degrade our chances. It's going to put them into a panic. So I'm going to use this staff that I have in my hand. I'm going to support myself, and I'm going to jam my sword in the ground, and I'm going to stay perfectly still, even though I'm hurt, so that I can inspire the men to continue to fight. Well, that's exactly what he does. And as a result, he nearly dies because of it. For some reason, his feet were planted firmly when he got hit. He did not collapse as a result of his pelvis being broken. He did not collapse as a result of that large mini ball going through his body. And he jams his sword into the ground, and he stands and he starts directing men again, until finally enough blood came out of him that he ends up collapsing on the field. It wasn't just blood coming out of him, though. Out of his hip, blood and urine both were pouring from his body. The urine ended up inside of his body, and that's part of the reason why he went into that septic shock so quickly. So Chamberlain had the Pennsylvanians under him, like I said earlier. He had the 121st, the 142nd, the 143rd, the 149th, 150th, and 187th Pennsylvanians out here, from what I can tell from the historical logs that I read. So he is now a Keystone man, whether he likes it or not. And the Pennsylvanians are very happy to follow him. He's a very brave man, and they all know it. So and an inspirational leader. He has words for these guys. Well, one of the things that happens to him the night before this fight is he has a premonition about himself. Oddly enough, it's a lot like the soldiers that fought at Gettysburg. There were a few of them that had very bad premonitions about themselves. He went into a mood, if you will, and as he was passing over the camp of all of his men, he felt like this might be his last night. And that could be from PTSD, being battle weary and worn down, and knowing that the fight is still going regardless of what they do or how hard they hit the enemy. It seems like the enemy won't quit. So he goes into this somber mood. The next day he goes into the fight, and just like he had predicted, it took him down. But this fight that he has internally in his body's strong enough to maintain his health. And he continues to live for a very long time after the fight. Out here at this crossroads in the middle of Petersburg, Virginia, very unassuming spot. You would not know that this was the location where Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was actually wounded and nearly killed. And it's in a spot where really there's not much of a place to pull off and check it out. But just on the other side of these woods here is the actual battlefield itself, where the Battle of the Crater took place later on that year. After hearing about the wounding of Chamberlain and thinking it to be mortal, General Grant comes out to the location and does something that he only did once during the American Civil War. He actually did a field commission of a brigadier general as a result of heroism and his conduct and duty. It happened on location where he was being worked on, 3 miles from the location where he had actually been hit. It's a pretty amazing moment in American Civil War history, and nobody thought Chamberlain was going to survive except for one person, and that was his brother Thomas. If it weren't for his brother Thomas finding those doctors to get him help, Chamberlain may have died there in that hospital because they all gave him up for death. But Thomas goes and finds 2 doctors who do experiments on his body, and those experiments lead to a change, leads to something that eventually down the road military medical physicians learn from it, and it turns into a miracle overnight for a lot of people. It changes the lives of a lot of people who need similar treatment. So Thomas finds Dr. Shaw and Dr. Townsend, and those men start operating and working on him, and they work all through the night, and they labor on Joshua as much as they can until they get so weary of seeing him in pain that they decide that they need to stop. Well, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was under morphine and chloroform, and somehow the pain was so severe that he was coming back, and he was actually awake through most of this. When they decided to stop because they just didn't want to see him in pain anymore, he turns to the doctors and he tells them to continue working. Joshua was no idiot. He knew that if those men didn't do their work, that he was going to lose his life. And those men continued to work through the night. As a result of some of what they did, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain had a fighting chance to live. After the war was over with, and well, shortly before, Chamberlain would be seen again by a new doctor looking at him named Dr. Vanderkieft. Dr. Vanderkieft was doing exploratory surgery on him, and he knew that because of the sepsis, the urosepsis that was happening, all the infections and the scar tissue that was going on in his body, that they were going to have to put a catheter in Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain to drain the urine from his body so that his body could heal naturally, because they didn't have some of the advances that we have today with medications. So he decides to create an L-shaped catheter and bend that thing in a way that it's going to fit up inside of his urethra and continue to pass the urine out of his body. Well, as a result, his body's rejecting the catheter. It's a silver catheter, by the way. It's not the sterile type of thing that we have today. It gets crusted over real quickly. They're leaving it in 2 and 3 and 4 days at a time. And the man's having to have it removed and put back in and removed and put back in. And his body is going through all of this infection. And the urosepsis is causing things in him like he's going delirious. He's losing his mind. He has a fever so bad that they can't keep it under control. But through it all, he's able to fight his way out of this and make his way back into the ranks by November, which is kind of crazy to think about. And he's back on the saddle and he's fighting. And of course, you know the story, where he's at Appomattox receiving the army for the surrender there in Appomattox, Virginia. As a result of scarring tissue and constant infections and constant checkups, he ends up having a fistula open up on his body. And if you don't know what that is, the man has a hole that ends up growing at the base of his private area. And as a result of that hole, not only is an infection coming out of there, but urine, blood, and anything else secreting from the body. And he's not able to control his bladder properly. This is something that Chamberlain has to deal with for the rest of his entire life. So they do another exploratory surgery where they take skin from the perineum and they create a flap to close up that fistula, that hole. And it works for a little bit, but then it fails. As a result, it just ends up staying open. For the rest of his life, he's going to have the infections cleared up. He's also going to evacuate his bladder through that hole in his body, not through anything else. And again, science has not created a way for this man to be able to take care of himself with all the problems that he has. But thanks to Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain dealing with the pain in his life and dealing with this issue, science is able to catch up. And future generations are going to benefit from this man's suffering. The craziest thing that I've learned about this while doing research was history tells this grandiose story of Chamberlain winning the Medal of Honor as a result of his fighting there at Little Round Top in Gettysburg. And it doesn't highlight the level of sacrifice that this man actually went through for the rest of his life. This caused so many disabilities for this man, to include the infection. We're talking not being able to ride a horse, which was extremely important. That was the car of its day. Not being able to walk for long periods of time. Loss of all sexual function, being able to go to the bathroom properly, and many other things, to include the PTSD which he suffered from on a daily basis or regular basis, which affected his life, his marriage, and his relationships with friends and close people. And as the rain's falling right now in Petersburg, I can't help but think that Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, due to all the sickness and the uneasiness that he felt throughout the rest of his life, probably felt like the rain was coming down on him all the time. It's the sacrifice that he made here on these fields and other fields like it that makes Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, to me, one of the most important soldiers in all of the United States Army. He's a Medal of Honor recipient, a very brave man, and I can't help but feel a debt of gratitude for that soldier. So what's the result of the fight out here? Well, a lot of casualties for the Union Army. Also, the loss of some very vital land for the Confederate Army. And a big, big red flag to Robert E. Lee to basically let him know that the fight had changed and moved in another direction. Something that he did not know before the attacks out here at Petersburg. As a result, he shifts his men south and into the earthworks around here, and it becomes a very long siege, and Lee knows that it's not a matter of if things go wrong, but a matter of when they go wrong, and he's essentially fighting to survive. A lot of casualties out here in Petersburg during that time, but a lot of casualties during this particular battle too. One of which was Medal of Honor recipient Joshua Chamberlain, school teacher from Maine. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video out here in Petersburg, Virginia, talking about the man from Maine. And if you don't mind, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends on all your socials. Till next time, from Petersburg, Virginia, this is History with Waffles.